I know that Andrea works with a lot of manufacturers that are having to work during this time, and a lot of folks know people in the healthcare community or that are working at in stores and stuff. So just taking a second to thank them today, if you can, would be greatly appreciated. We're also talking about something that's obviously very timely. And so in today's webinar, you'll hear from Andrew Pope, who's the Senior Vice President at the Footwear Distributors and Retailers Association. And we also have Andrea DeFelice, who is the Director of Advocacy and Engagement at the National Association of Manufacturers. But before we begin, I want to go over some quick logistics. The slides referenced during today's program will be sent around in a follow-up in the coming days. For those who have not participated in our webinars before, we will not be opening the phone lines for questions during the webinar. Instead, we will take all of your questions via the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them, and then I will pose them to the speakers at the conclusion of their remarks. In addition, I want to make this as engaging as possible. So if you have kind of questions, we have over 150 people on right now, and we have a lot of other folks that are going to be getting the recording. But if you have questions, please post them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer all of them. I know a lot of the folks here are going through the same things and maybe even have some insights to share from their own experiences. So please feel free to use that chat box to talk with your fellow colleagues in the profession. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrea for her to begin her presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick. So hi, everyone. My name's Andrea DeFelice. I'm Director of Advocacy and Engagement at the National Association of Manufacturers, also known as NAM or the NAM. It's pretty interchangeable. So like Nick said, I know this has been an interesting time for all of us, but I know I was looking forward to talking with you all, my peers. It's a nice break from the day-to-day and looking forward to connecting with you all today. So this is super relevant to me. Actually, 7 years ago this week, I drove from Washington State to DC to start my career in public affairs as a congressional scheduler. And I was working for a member of Congress in a leadership position who represented one of the furthest districts from DC. And I really struggled to find times for meetings in DC between the members' official, political, and personal commitments. I actually started to advise constituents looking to schedule time in DC to reconsider their travel altogether for an in-district meeting, and to meanwhile share their story through other channels, whether it's the communication.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, okay, sorry about that. So I just couldn't justify encouraging people from my home district to spend roughly $2,000 on travel, and so we started talking about ways to share their stories without a DC meeting. So clearly I wasn't very good at being a scheduler, so I moved on to NAM and applied the same logic where we've completely abandoned our annual cattle call fly-in, previously known as the Manufacturing Summit, and we've shifted to more digital tactics, which I know Nick will go into later on how you can build into some grassroots advocacy and harness these digital tactics. But I'm going to share some resources with you today that you can use with your advocates. So let's just level set for a minute. You've just made a really tough decision to cancel your fly-in. Beyond the monetary impact, the loss of this opportunity for your supporters to meet face-to-face with members of Congress and their staff may seem devastating. So now what? Well, despite all these disruptions, there are many other opportunities to engage your stakeholders to effectively advocate from where they reside. And for many organizations, virtual advocacy is more important than ever. So let's talk about how to get creative and stand out as you rethink traditional Hill meetings. And today you'll learn about ways you can continue to advocate during a pandemic, but more importantly, you can use this opportunity to add to your portfolio advocacy tactics moving forward. So shifting to a virtual advocacy day. So as many of you all know, fly-ins typically include updates for your stakeholders and other type of advocate training. So don't lose this momentum and the opportunity that you've worked so hard towards building up to a fly-in, and know that there's so many eyeballs on screens right now, and you want your members and supporters to know that your organization can effectively respond in a time of crisis. I know for my organization, this is especially important as manufacturers are facing many challenges with these shelter-in-place orders, and they're turning to us to say, you know, what can you do for us? And so this is really our moment to step up, and I'm sure many of you are facing the same challenges. So you want to shift your messaging. You don't want to be completely tone deaf to what's happening. So it's going to kind of depend on the situation you're in and what you advocate for. But a great example of this is with, we had a multi-million-dollar workforce campaign that we've spent the last 2 years planning called Creators Wanted. And it was to help inspire the youth into a career in modern manufacturing. And we were about to kick off this entire campaign. And we've now shifted it to Creators Respond. And we're now highlighting how manufacturers are stepping up in creative ways to respond to this pandemic. So hopefully you all have a great communications team that can help with this, but just think of how you can shift your messaging to meet your members' needs, but also respond to the situation at hand. So like I said, consider keeping the dates and that you've planned, and instead engaging online through a series of webinars if you already had content developed that was educational. And sorry about that. So during these webinars and any communications leading up to any planned advocacy day you had, announce a clear call to action and next steps. Your teams to understand the layout of what's happening on the Hill, and be mindful of that, but make sure you're clear in what your call to action is. Some ideas to shift to a virtual advocacy day. You could use Facebook Live. Obviously, it's a little more public, so maybe less sensitive content. If you had already engaged with an elected official to speak at your fly-in, ask if they would consider doing the Facebook Live or even a Twitter town hall if they're open to answering questions from the public. I will say, always do a practice round of all this at least one day prior. We're in a new era of testing technology. I think we're having some minor issues today as well. So just be sure you test all this out. I did a quick search of conferencing platforms that would be available, and many organizations already have their own. Be mindful of participant limits on all of them. I know my organization, we use GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar, Zoom, and LoopUp, but I did a quick search, and it looks like Zoom's offering some free trials, and so is Cisco and WebEx, and those are pretty highly rated as well. So if you're a little budget tight, a lot of these conferencing companies are definitely responding to this increase in demand, but don't want to be perceived as taking advantage of it. So they're working closely with companies to see how they can support their initiatives. So definitely reach out to different conferencing softwares to see how you can utilize them if you're planning to continue hosting any type of speaking sessions with a large audience. All right, social media. So these are pretty standard for anyone who's engaged in social media and advocacy, but just some reminders. Create a hashtag that's related to your call to action. Make sure it's unique. You can just do a quick search on different platforms. Avoid bash tags. You don't want to go negative. Use capitals when they make sense, but keep them short. And then I find social media guides are great. You can include, instructions on how to post to Facebook and Twitter. That's often been really, it seems trivial to us, but I know for our members, if we want them to post to their social media accounts, then we provide them a step-by-step guide, and they found it very helpful. And write sample tweets, tweets or Facebook posts. If you have any infographics, definitely pair those there. And tag members of Congress where it makes sense. And I know that if, we use an advocacy software to create a lot of our social media content and tweet it out. But you can, if you don't have advocacy software, if you just Google like Twitter handles for the 116th Congress, many organizations like ours have already developed cheat sheets with all their handles. So I was trying to really think through like other creative ways to help you all if you don't have an advocacy software platform. And back when I was working on a campaign, I used to use this like old trick to create pre-written tweets, and you literally take code as if you were coding like a web page, and you can create a pre-populated tweet. So someone just clicks this hyperlink and it already has the text of the tweet. And then if you wanted to include a hyperlink, I know this is a slide on a webinar and not that helpful, but I'm happy to follow up after all of this to explain how to create a pre-written tweet just to make it easier for users to post. So I just thought I'd share that trick. I did see a question come in asking what advocacy software we use. My organization, we do use Phone to Action, but there are many other advocacy platforms out there that the Public Affairs Council can connect you with. And they all kind of meet different needs for your organization. So definitely reach out to Nick to find out what those companies are if you're interested in learning more about advocacy software, which they are stepping up in a huge way to help with this new age of advocacy virtually. Additional tactics that we're all pretty aware of. Again, we use our advocacy software for this, so I tried to think of ways to do it more manually if you don't have it. I know GovTrack, you can share that link with your members so they can easily put their address in and find out who their legislators are to get their contact info. If you're doing a letter writing campaign, obviously share a template for the letter, but really encourage personalization. Stories really do matter. And then phone calls. So I asked a couple people on the Hill, it kind of depends. Many offices are rolling phones to voicemails, but others are routing them to staff cell phones. I know the Senate is still at 100% capacity, so folks are still going to the office. So if you don't have an advocacy software, you can share the Capitol switchboard number with your members, and that the operator will connect that individual with their senator's or representative's office. And don't forget, I didn't put this in the slide, but to provide them a script for their calls. So finally, with all of this, like I mentioned, within the letter writing and with phone calls and also social media, stories really matter. It's no secret that the power of authentic stories really dwarfs impersonal, effective emails and calls, and it really annoys, much like meeting in person does. And work with your advocates to curate anecdotes. Sometimes you really have to pull them out, but if you already know your members have a great story to share, work really hard to pull those stories out. You've got time, we're all at home, and collect photos and videos and find a way to showcase your industry. The NAM has created a series. We've got our Creators Wanted stories. Those were obviously prepared with a company, but we also did a different campaign called Keeping Our Promise on tax reform. And we used user-generated stories that were just sent to us through an email that we solicited our members through email. Share us your stories on how tax reforms impacted you. And we followed up with those members to get more information, and we packaged those up and shared those across our social media channels as well as our website. And another thing, once you have these stories, reach out to the comms staff in these offices and share them if it's their constituent. I mean, they might be looking for this content right now, so don't hesitate to go to communication staff with these stories from your advocates. So again, I talked a lot about ways to participate in advocacy virtually, we do use advocacy software to aid in this. So my contact information is here if you want to reach out to me to learn more about that. Don't hesitate to message me, call me. I definitely have a lot of time on my hands at home, but I hope this was helpful, and I'll turn it back to Nick now.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciate you doing that. Of course, also doing it on an extremely tight deadline. We started this just literally 4 days ago when we wanted to do this webinar, because we were getting a ton of questions. So I appreciate you doing that in the midst of all the work that you're doing for NAM. With that, I would like to turn it over to Andy, who's going to talk a little bit about how to actually have a virtual meeting on the Hill.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Great. Awesome. Thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate Public Affairs Council for hosting this. It's super important. I don't know how long we're all going to be working remotely. So it's super important that we were talking to our CEOs the other day, and this phrase came up of radical acceptance of it is what it is, and we have to adapt and we have to move forward. And the attitude of, oh, woe is me, is not going to solve any problems. And one of my mentors I was talking to during this time told me there's no better time to innovate than a crisis, mainly because we have to innovate during a crisis if we're going to make our voices heard in Washington. So I work for the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. We are an association that represents about 90% of the entire industry. My job is to run the day-to-day operations, manage staff. I also oversee our advocacy strategies and implementations, as well as manage our communications, and I manage our innovation working group for the industry. So what's cool about that is I get to, for the past probably 4 years, I've worked with many brands that you know, like Sperry, Hoka, Teva, Steve Madden, a number of brands, in digitizing how they design, develop, and sell footwear. So I've been working with digital tools now for many years. So as we emerge into this new digital world, I feel at home in it. On the bottom right-hand side, I don't think it's spinning right now, but that was actually a 3D printed shoe that I actually scanned and augmented and dropped at the White House. And if it was actually, if the video was running, then you would actually be able to see the shoe spinning around. So I've tested out a lot of different software. I've tested out a lot of different techniques in advocacy. And to further prove things out and try to help people with workflows, because I think that's the biggest challenge right now, is we're all individually thinking about how we work from home. But I have to think about how our whole team works and syncs up in harmony to ensure that we don't have any disruptions from physical office space to a virtual office space. So part of that for me was creating Advocacy Help Desk. It's a free podcast for everyone in advocacy. You can go to advocacyhelpdesk.com. We're on YouTube, we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, and we've been interviewing leaders on a podcast, and we've actually videotaped it in a studio. One, to try to figure out how to do podcasts efficiently for associations and give them, basically just hack it out and give it to them. But two, to really figure out workflows around new technologies and share best practices. So I've been doing a lot of different digital things in this space. There's several rules to digital transformations, and that's really what we're in. We're in an age of digital transformations. And there's several key rules to that. The first rule is digital tools should mimic the physical world. There is a reason why when you're working on a laptop, it has files and folders. Because when they were building the MacBook, they realized that in order for it to be user-friendly, it had to mimic the physical world that you already lived in. So that's why we have files and folders on our laptops that look exactly like they do with filing cabinets back in the day. So there's a physical sense to it that makes sense to the user. There's a strategy and organized workflow for execution. There's simple guides and testing. Just like Andrea was talking about, you've got to beta test some of this stuff ahead of time before you start to use it. Key thing is attitude and belief. I do believe that digital meetings can be better than physical Hill meetings. I do believe that, and I'll show you why. You also need to figure out your user-friendly, low-barrier platforms. You need low clicks, low downloads. You need low latency, meaning like, connectivity issues. And you need vast socialization, meaning you want to use a platform people know about, not something new and novel, but something that's tried and true. So as we go through these, I want to cover these really quickly. I'm going to start with doing a virtual fly-in on the Hill, how you could do it. Then I'll talk a bit about branding and engaging your advocates. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about virtual reality, because I do believe at this time when we're at home, it's an opportunity to think about when we reemerge from this crisis, and we will reemerge from this crisis, what kind of tools and what kind of world are we going to be working in the advocacy space? And I think virtual reality is one of those. So first of all, virtual advocacy meetings should look like a physical one. I do believe that you need to do face-to-face meetings. I think you need to do video. Every meeting I'm doing right now, I'm turning on my webcam. I'm recording things. Every time we talk to a CEO, I'm giving them an opportunity to see my face, my reactions, and get subtle hints and clues. And just like a physical fly-in when you're face-to-face, I think we should use video. I've heard a lot of people talk about conference calls. That's fine. I don't think it conveys the serious tones and gives you the feedback you need from Hill staffers. I just don't. It's an easy way to do it, but in this day and age, if you really want to move the dial, I think video is the only way to do that and convey seriousness and passion, and actually connecting a story to a face is hugely important right now. So here's more about how you go through this kind of workflow. A virtual workflow looks like a physical one. It's exactly the same. If you're scheduling meetings on the Hill, you've got to make scheduling requests. You got to organize your groups or teams of advocates. A part of that, you got to have a staffer assigned to them to walk them around, just like physically. You got to have a staffer assigned to them to do it virtually on the platform that you're using. You've got to train your staff on a digital platform, how to use it effectively, what are the tools, how to troubleshoot things. If you're going to get advocates into a platform with you, with a staffer, you come up with a quick guide for advocates ahead of time based on already training and trying to figure it out, how to activate a camera, how to activate sound, what to expect. And then, of course, you need a digital leave behind. You need a PDF that you can give to the Hill staff once you have that. So strategy one for everybody as you're thinking about doing a virtual video, again, video meeting with Hill staff, is to go old school and small ball. So start off doing 2 or 3 digital Hill meetings to test it out. So I've done this with my friends on the Hill, where I've actually engaged staffers and done a video, just conversation about what they're doing, how they're doing, etc. Not really pushing any issues, but just testing it out. And what I found is that Hill staff are very willing to do video. They just haven't thought about it, and people haven't asked them, but they're very willing to do it. It's actually easier in some sense than getting on a conference call and trying to coordinate among people talking over each other to get their points across. And again, it gives a visual. You get to see that face and hear that person talk about the issues. But as you test it out, you get to see what problems exist before you plan a full digital fly-in, before you expand it. You get to see your workflow challenges. You get to see what the staffer may have problems with, so you can figure out how to solve it ahead of time. I would suggest as you start out, targeting members' offices you already know. All of us work with certain members. For footwear, the hub is mainly like Portland, New York, etc. So there's members in Portland that we always go to with our issues, and I know that if I contact them and I've built relations with them, they'll try this out with me and they'll be willing to do it because they know who I am and they trust me. So ask the people you already know for face-to-face digital meetings to start it off, and then use that as a tool to tell other staffers you've already done it with other people. That's the key reinforcement is the staffer knows someone else has already done it and it's not novel and new. It kills the fear of doing it. Once you've done several of these, go a bit bigger. Set up meetings for advocates who have done a real fly-in before. So start small again. Figure out who those advocates are that have already had a physical fly-in with you, especially people that may be technologically savvy that you won't have to have too many steps with to figure it out. But they know the game. They know what to say. They know how the meetings work. They know the workflow around it. So you start with that and allow them to tell their stories, and you do a leave behind a few times. Once you have that, and you've already started, you've done some of these meetings with Hill staff, you kind of get the idea of what the kinks are, where the problems are. And then at that point, I would say then you can go to strategy 2 and go all out. Fly a vast, why not? Why not do this? It costs nothing, nearly nothing at this point, to set up a full fly-in to replace your physical fly-in. And a part of that is It's the same thing. You get a scheduler to schedule the meetings. You assign advocates into groups of 3 or 4, maybe 2 or 3, it just depends. You assign a staffer from your association to be the lead and guide of setting up the meetings, running the meetings, hosting the meetings, making sure the advocates are good, they understand it, making sure the Hill staff is good, and just facilitating those face-to-face interactions and making sure the lead behind is left there. We are right now trying to do a digital briefing where we actually invite many staffers into one visual conference where Nike and other retailers can share what's happening to workers across the country. So we're doing it less of a vast fly-in because we're actually a really small association, and we're trying to do it to where we can get 20 or 30 staffers on a video conference call, and actually discuss issues with them. So we're playing that right now, probably Thursday or Friday. But for most people, you know, us included, and just like Andrew, we're running targeted letter campaigns and social media campaigns to give it critical mass. So as we're trying to set up meetings and have face-to-face conversations, and as you plan a large virtual fly-in, and I'll tell you how to do it in just a second, you know, the thing is you want a ground game and an air game to kind of reinforce what you're doing. And by doing a letter campaign, you're actually expanding your advocacy participants, and you're actually being able to target them. You can find new people. So I know an association that ran a targeted campaign this past week, and they had something like 100,000 letters sent, and they built their database by 60,000 new people that they could go into and look at and find new people they could engage with, pull in, help share their stories. And a part of that is some of these new people who have the best stories could never come to DC. We have a lot of small business owners. They can't afford flights up to DC to come and tell their story in person. Digital meetings actually allow you to find new small businesses and other people who normally couldn't do it. And it actually allows them to engage in a brand new way that's very effective. But as you do this and you're targeting and you're trying to figure out what participants you want to have in these things, first of all, it's what your gut tells you, who wrote the letters, who gets on your calls, who's done advocacy flying days, who are your champions. These are the people that you know how to message and give a story, and who want to actually do this and engage and are willing to do video calls. And then what's your data tell you? So if you run this broad campaign, a letter campaign, you start to build your database, you start to target. We use Spark Influence to run our advocacy platform, and we chose Spark Influence because it actually gives us more data on the back end. It's not just who took it and what company. I get to see a social profile that they use on Twitter to see how passionate they are, what they're talking about, and that helps me find new people that I can pull in and say, one, I want this person telling these stories on Capitol Hill, or two, I'm going to use that person because they have 100 people that I want to connect with, and I'm going to ask them to send out a broad campaign. And this is the time where advocacy platforms are hugely effective. If you don't have one, you should definitely look to get one. But for us, Spark Influence does something that other platforms can't do in helping us find these champions and these kind of influencers that we would never find otherwise. Another tip is when you're doing it, use visual props if you can for footwear. I want my guys holding up their shoes. I want them talking about product. I want them talking about their people. Record the whole process. This is not during the meetings while you're having these visual meetings. This is actually while you're setting everything up. I think it's hugely important to message out to your association, your members, how much work you're putting into this to make their stories come to life. So here's how I think you should do it. And Andrew covered really good platforms. I'm huge on Zoom. I've been using Zoom for over 2 years now, and I'm not a salesperson, but I can tell you it's low cost. It's $200 per month for 10 hosts. That means 10 staffers in an association can run 10 meetings at the same time. You could have 20 advocates on a call at one time if you wanted to. But I would say, just like a normal fly-in, 2 or 3 or 4 on a meeting with a Hill staffer or a member. So you can host 10 of those at a time. So you can ramp up a virtual fly-in, have more of an impact than a physical fly-in where maybe you're hitting 6, 7 offices in one day. You could hit 10 per staffer per day. It's ease of use. It's one software download. It looks professional. People are socialized to using it. It's pretty advanced. Most Hill staff have used Facebook Live. They've used FaceTime. They used all these digital tools. It's not a huge thing for them to quickly download a link and then get on a video call. There's no personal info needed. Here's a key thing. If you're thinking about using Skype, there's a personal identifier associated with it. If you're thinking about using FaceTime, there's a phone number to a staffer identified with it. For Zoom, it's just a link, and you click on the link and you get right into the meeting. There's one link for the meeting, and that's really key. It's just one link for the advocates and for the Hill staff. It's easy to pass out information, so handouts over it. It feels like a physical roundtable meeting. Here's a quick look. Again, I don't know if this is going to go because I think it was in video, but I think maybe it's in PowerPoint. So anyway, this is the inside of what it looks like. But as you go through, you just hit schedule meeting. You set a meeting date on a calendar. You get a link. I mean, it literally takes 10 seconds to set one up. You get a link and you send it to, you can put it into a calendar invite, and you can invite your advocates. You can send it to the staffer, and then that's the one link that you run. When it's time to run the meeting, you go back into your platform and you just hit start meeting. And now the advocates click on the link, the Hill staffer clicks on the link, and all of a sudden you're in the video feed and talking with them. This is an example of a small business owner. I do video interviews and we post them up on on a platform. It's a new media channel I call Kicks Over Coffee. So we talk about footwear while we drink a cup of coffee. So I typically send these out in the morning as people wake up. They can listen to them or watch them passively as they go into work. But this is Anthony. He's a small business owner who owns he owns one shoe store in Wisconsin. He could never make it to Washington, D.C., but I could get him on a Skype meeting, and this is a Zoom meeting. This is a Zoom meeting where I'm interviewing him, and he can actually engage with me and talk with me, and I can record it and post it. But also, you could add in another person to this, and again, this isn't on video, but if you watch video, you would see me talking to him, and he would be nodding his head. He'd be leaning back in his chair, thinking about how he's going to answer it. And this is where video provides these cues that you need. If you're in a meeting and you're watching a Hill staffer crinkle their brow, it means they don't get the point, and you have to lean in more to that point. If you're on a conference call, you're never going to see that. You're never going to know where to reinforce the message. You're never going to know when to back off the message. You can't read the tone of the meeting to see its effectiveness. In video, you don't have that. It's exactly the same as you would if you're in a physical face-to-face meeting. This is me on Zoom. This is what the platform looks like as you run it. If you look down at the bottom, you can see manage participants. You can see the share button. If you click on that, you can easily share something from your desktop, like the leave behind. It's super functional. This is our staff. This is how big FDRA is. Not that big at all, even with our consultants. But we do Zoom meetings every Monday morning, and as needed during the week to coordinate our efforts on a variety of things. But this is what the Zoom platform looks like. This is a large meeting. We also do meetings every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for all our members. We've been having 200 people join by video conference in order for us to give updates, share intelligence, share solutions. So for the Zoom platform, we run all our webinars on it. We run all our video meetings. I do interviews and hit recordings. And now we're starting to do Hill briefings all through Zoom. And for us, being a small association, $200 a month for 10 accounts is pretty affordable. So with that, I'm going to keep going. Yes, members of Congress offices do have Zoom capabilities. I see that. It only requires to download software. It's just like downloading Microsoft Outlook. It's as simple as that. It's just software that you can download. And then once you download it, you just click on a link and you get right into it. That's how simple it is. It's not complicated at all. Really quickly, going on that theme, because I'm trying to be cognizant of my time. There's no better time to build your brand than now with all your advocates and find new people to bring in. I know a lot of people are afraid of these times, but be careful that you don't digitize your bureaucracy. Now is the time to put out as much content as possible and to explain to all your people out there what you're doing on their behalf and explaining complex policy items to them in common language. In essence, this is the second side of our job, is being kind of shepherds or Sherpas through this whole process, helping people and advocating on their behalf. But there's a variety of ways to do that now visually. One of those is Kicks Over Coffee. Again, that's a video, you can't see it, but it's just a theme thing that we do now. And we've done 15 interviews over the last week with CEOs and industry leaders trying to share insights from the industry. So that other people are so desperate for information right now. about how it's impacting other people, what they're doing about closing retail spaces, how they're changing their workflows, what they're using. Are they doing meetings? Are they, how are they reshipping or rerouting product coming in from China into warehouses, et cetera. And this allows us to capture those interviews. You can go to kicksovercoffee.com and see some of those. But it allows us to engage the grass tops, get them to talk and send it out, and really build kind of brand loyalty, brand equity, and let people know that we're here trying to provide solutions for them, not just in advocacy, but in typically just helping the industry. Our industry share intelligence is so crucial right now. And we're also doing it through our podcast. We have a podcast, Shoe and Show. The one that's up right now is Dick Johnson, who's the CEO for Foot Locker. He's sharing tips and practices about how they're navigating this with their workforce and with their stores, how they're changing their e-commerce platforms. So we record these interviews. If you don't have a podcast, now is the time to get a podcast. If you haven't done a video series, now is the time to do a video series. It's not hard. I can tape a Kicks Over Coffee in 15 minutes with someone and have it turned around and posted in another 30 minutes. It's pretty simple to do. I'm happy to help anybody know how to do that. You can email me and I'll give you the whole workflow hack. But we just recorded, 5 of us recorded a Shoe and Show all remotely from our basements into one platform, and interviewing leaders. And we're now sending out, we used to do once a week podcasts. We're now doing 3 times a week podcast because our workers are at home. They want and need content. They need reassurances. They want to know what's happening. They want to know these tips and best practices. So we're doing it visually through Kicks Over Coffee on YouTube, and then we're doing kind of the audio version through Shoe and Show to help share ideas and best practices. And on nearly every single episode that we do across all our different mediums is a push to send letters to Congress. It's a reinforcement of you've got to stay active, stay close. There's updates that we provide. And then the one recent thing that we did was, I guess it's not on here, but we are doing flash briefings now where I set up a digital studio. It's just a JPEG, and I use Zoom. You can change your virtual background. So I bought a green screen and stuck it here in my basement, and I changed my background to this JPEG that looks like a news studio. And in essence, I really do believe that people are watching the news because they're fearful, but they don't really want to watch Trump that much, and they really don't watch the news that much. I think trust is an all-time low for a lot of news outlets. People are looking for information, but they may not like the tone or the way it's being presented. And I think for us, we have an opportunity to micro-target our industries and have messages from people they trust here in Washington telling them what's happening. So the flash briefings we do are less than 5 minutes, and we do it every other day. It's our association president, myself, on Zoom, on a side-by-side interview, and we just chat about things and share insights from having worked in Congress and past executive branch administrations, what people can expect, what's in the bill, how to stay involved, and it's through our own authentic voices. And we've had a huge success and huge number of people engaging and participating with us in that and watching those things. And then finally, I'll wrap up really quickly so I don't go too far beyond, because I can talk forever on this stuff. But there's no better time to prepare for the future when there are no sports on and there's nowhere to go. I mean, Netflix is running, so that's good. But in reality, this is the time when we start thinking about the future. And we're already in the future digitally, and you're learning about all these tools and what you can do. But the step beyond is when we emerge and the sunshine comes back out, where are you going to be in advocacy, and what are you going to be planning for? I think when we return to normal, there's not going to be many budgets. I think virtual fly-ins are going to be the norm, especially if you do one, you realize how easy it is, how many more people you can pull in, how many more meetings you could have, and how it's not that different from a physical meeting. You might actually be less exhausted by walking around. There's going to be a fear of travel. People may not want to travel to DC. They may not want to travel to your events. Video meetings will remain key for business operations. We've already seen that in our industry. We've seen that in our workflow. We actually canceled several of our summits, and I'm actually transitioning them into digital summits. I've already tested out different platforms that we're using, for networking, and then one to actually run a physical summit, not as a webinar, but more of an engagement where participants can ask questions and then the participants rate those questions. So it's almost crowdsourcing what the discussion should be around. So we're already doing that. And then what I'm really excited about is virtual reality will finally become useful, which is exciting to me. That's me with my headset on. But as everything keeps going digital, as policymakers aren't going to be able to travel as much as they used to, I don't believe they will. I don't believe advocates are going to be able to travel up to DC to tell their stories. Virtual reality is going to remain a key way to film facilities and deliver that story through associations to members to take them there in a virtual setting. We've already seen like how people can be seen as innovators on this, and brands that are using it, they can grow their PAC funds. It's actually super affordable if you use it with the right people. This is an example of VR is in essence 360-degree video. I've actually worked with, I have a side company called VR Advocacy. You can go to vradvocacy.com and get tips and key points, but we go to facilities, film them, put them in a 3D setting, and a policymaker can take a tour of that facility so that they actually understand what the needs are or what the story is behind manufacturing or you know any sort of thing. We could do a shoe factory, for example. So we can do it for that and take the policymaker there. And conversely, we can go in and film some cool stuff and use it for booth bait. So as trade shows resume and events resume, we actually work with Decker's Brands, which has Uggs, etc. They build a 3D store, and we actually use that to drive people to our booth to engage with them and get them signed up as new advocates and send letters to members of Congress. This campaign was about a year ago, but it's a way to grab people by your booth instead of just giving them a boring handout. You give them a really cool experience. And part of that, GSK actually just used VR Advocacy to build out a virtual tour of Washington, D.C. that they're using at all their events when they resume, to engage advocates and tell them how important it is to stay involved and engage. And they're using that to transition them to give money to their PAC. So it's a cool, unique way. But if you go to vradvocacy.com, I'm not trying to sell anybody on this, but I just want people to be thoughtful about this, because when the sun comes out again, there's going to be a new world that we're all working and living in. And I think preparing for it now means that you're going to be way ahead later. And a lot of people won't be stuck in what they are now, trying to just swim in the digital mess that's happening. So, to that end, if I can be helpful with anything, I'm happy to do so. You can find me on LinkedIn, just LinkedIn, Andy Polk. You can send me messages there. I'll send you collateral information. I can help you with workflow around these virtual meetings and how to do video. I can give you tips and ideas. I'll give you tips and ideas on how to restructure offices virtually through workflows, but I'm just here to help. That's mainly why I created Advocacy Help Desk, because I wanted to reach out and provide a medium for people to learn new ways of doing things in advocacy. So hopefully that's a help. Nick, hopefully this has been helpful, and I'm happy to answer questions after Nick does his presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. Just kind of a quick question before I get into my slides. How many have you found that congressional offices have been accepting of doing these video meetings and doing kind of that extra step that's not just a conference call?
Yeah, you got to ask them, and I think you lean on them. And I think the thing is they're more willing to do it if they know there's a local constituent on that call. So if you're got a lobbyist and they're trying to do a video call, the staffer is going to be more apt to do a conference call. But if you tell them, hey, Anthony from Wisconsin, he runs a one-store shop in the shopping center, wants to get on a video call so he can show you his office and talk to you about his challenges, the staffer is going to take it, because as a staffer for 10 years, that was my job, right? If my constituent wanted me to take a phone call, I'd take a phone call. If they wanted me to take a video call, I was going to take a video call and figure it out, because I was there to serve them. So I think the tie-in is to make sure you have someone they actually want to see, and maybe you have something to show them, like a physical sample or something like that, some tool that they can't see over the phone. So you just got to be a little bit clever and make the ask, and be firm with the ask for it to be video. But the truth is, like, I think, the staffers are going to be doing video meetings if they go remote. If they're getting sent home, they're going to figure out how to do staff conference calls over video in the same way that we're all doing it in our staffs. So the socialization is going to be there, the willingness is going to be there. I just really think people need to push hard on staffers to accept the video feed, because you want it to be just like a face-to-face meeting for your advocates. And don't, it's okay if there's a hard no, but if there's a soft no, then keep pushing.
Yeah. That's helpful. I think some just kind of we got a bunch of questions in here, and I'm kind of collating some of them. Have you had any trouble with, and we've had trouble with our provider with overcapacity issues. Have you had any trouble with overcapacity with Zoom or other vendors that you've had? I know some folks have had trouble with Zoom. We've had trouble with GoToMeeting. What kind of experience are you having?
If you're going to use it, then you need to make sure that your Wi-Fi network is super fast. So in my house, we have like a 1 gigabyte speed. I know not everybody has that. That's the first thing to think about is what's your speed. If you don't have a high speed internet, then you need to plug into your box at your house. You need an Ethernet cord or an internet cord to plug directly into the box so there's no latency through kind of radio frequency waves or whatever on Wi-Fi, but plug directly into the flow. And I think that'll help a lot. We haven't had any problems with Zoom with 200 people on. The only challenges that we had was when we were Zooming with people in Italy, because I think Italy is at strained capacity, but that was the only time. But typically, I mean, I've got 65-year-old CEOs that have never done any video conference calls. We walked them through Zoom in 2 minutes and they loved it. And they really appreciated the face-to-face. And it actually helps us when we do face-to-face with our advocates because they know that we're trying to be as engaged as possible and we're not hiding. I remember I worked at Chick-fil-A back in the day in high school, and my boss one time told me, when you're solving a problem, you walk around the counter so that the person knows you actually care. You don't hide behind the counter when you got a problem. And I think video is that tool that we walk around the counter and we say, here we are, you can see us, we're going to be open, and we're going to try to help you as best we can.
Yeah, and some people have asked, like, are members of Congress actually downloading the software and staffers? And yeah, so my friend actually, I asked them before this webinar, works in the IT sector and handles members of Congress's offices. They all have different providers that they use, like Lockheed, etc. And he's had to outfit hundreds and hundreds of phones and laptops so that members of Congress and their staff can go mobile. Way more interested in using the Zoom and meeting and video conferencing platforms because they're doing it for their own staff meetings, internally. And I think that's where you start to see really big jumps in adoption is, organizations that are, having to also kind of deal with their own internal issues are now more accepting of external, technology platforms and et cetera. The other thing that I would also suggest is that we are trying out a ton. So we use Global Meet for this. There's definitely some pluses and minuses that we have with Global Meet. We've had a little bit in the beginning, some technical issues with this platform. We are currently using Zoom as well internally because we're going to see if that is going to be our new webinar platform. We are changing to be a completely Microsoft Office as well during this entire thing. So we're just testing out Teams as well. So just be open to different technology platforms, what they're really good at, what their value is. But there's definitely always pluses and minuses with each of the platforms. When you go into one of our virtual meetings, we actually built that platform because we don't want anyone to download anything. So when we do our virtual streaming of our workshops, it's a platform that we kind of put together with a protected stream that way. So there's definitely a lot of ways of doing it. I think just kind of getting comfortable with those types of asks. All right, I'm just gonna go through a couple of quick slides and then we'll take a couple more questions and we'll wrap up. The first thing I just want to say is we're kind of in unprecedented times, and if you need some, help and you're looking and around and you don't know of any organizations that have done this before, please reach out to the Public Affairs Council. We answer over 3,000 member requests in 2019. I have a feeling 2020 is going to be a much larger amount than that because I'm getting about 15 a day. Various things we're canceling our fly-in to we now need to start, a grassroots software platform because this is a major issue. Washington, D.C. offices, public affairs, communications, government relations is probably not going to be the first thing cut during this economic downturn because it is so heavily needed to ensure that the operations of the future of that company or association or industry can continue. And so we want to be a resource to make you as much effective as an advocate for your organization as possible. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. This slide is from our where we interviewed about 170 legislative staffers on Capitol Hill, and the number one, most effective advocacy tactic is visit in Washington D.C. with constituents. And as you go on, it gets down to like reports from prominent think tanks, and then lobby days at Capitol Hill, phone calls from constituents, all the way down to social media postings from constituents are now at the bottom. I think this is, going to change. This was done in early 2019. I think this is going to be very different if you did it today. And so one of my biggest suggestions is while we know that in-person meetings in Washington, D.C. with constituents or back in the district are the top two tactics, how do you recreate that online? And I think Andy did a great job of explaining that. But there's a ton of other tactics, and there's also 50 tactics that we've done. And so there's tons of different advocacy tactics that are available that you can do from home and can do digitally. Beyond the fly-in, when you're thinking about, a little bit more, what's the next step that Andy was talking about of how do we operate in this new era? What do you have at your disposal? Do you have expert consultants that you can live stream? Do you have a great company intranet page where you can be posting about what your organization is doing in Washington, D.C.? Also, I really think that all organizations should really look at all of their communications, all of the emails that they were planning to send out that year, and realize that now is the time to think about, is this message appropriate for these times? People can be frozen in fear, or they can be more energized than ever about your issue. If you're working with, let's say, a healthcare organization, they're going to be pretty engaged on this topic. So take advantage of that. If they're frozen in fear, give them messages that are going to help resonate and get them out of that that stumbling block that they're in. Do your advocates have more free time now because they're at home, or are they actually working more due to the virus, the spread of the virus? Are they healthcare workers? Are they in a factory making masks and they can't take action the same way that they once were? How are you going to reach them? And then, is this going to help you in the long term identify a new pool of supporters or build a stronger set of advocates? And I think Andy talks a little bit about that, of organizations that have actually grown the size of their advocacy database through this. What are the different people that you need to kind of reach out to, with this new kind of technology? So, talking a little bit further down the road, when we get out of just, I need to have a fly-in, or I need to develop a way to meet with a member of Congress virtually, what are some of the things that I think folks can fall, on in, when they're still going to be quarantined for potentially another 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 6 months? We don't know how long it's going to last. I really think organizations should focus on digital advocacy training. And I just kind of, the first kind of thing is that it has to be multi-channel. It has to meet your advocates where they are. Some people are really, really good at distance learning. They've taken a MOOC, a massive online course. Some people are not. So can you develop an on-demand module, or can you do classroom-style talks or can you do 5-minute briefs to get them? Can you do quizzes and traditional one-to-one assistance to help them with some of these things? A lot of times it takes some hand-to-hand combat to get someone comfortable with using Zoom or all these new technologies. Make sure it's also social media friendly. Andy mentioned this a lot. A lot of the things that he's doing, these interviews he's having with CEOs, he's posting immediately on social media. Social media, especially in these times, can be incredibly powerful. I got 5,000 views on a LinkedIn post that I talked about this exact issue about having a virtual fly-in. Before, I was not getting 5,000 views on a LinkedIn post. The people are online, more and more, and they're turning to social media to fill some of that time, to answer some of their questions, to make themselves feel better about what's going on in the world and connect with their fellow citizens. And so make sure that everything is social media friendly that you're doing, and in your digital advocacy training program should be like that. It also should be formalized. Think about having to graduate your attendees through the program, develop a name for your program, cultivate a list of people that you want to invite if you're going to be moving forward. It also must be relevant. It has to help people do their day-to-day job or move them forward as an employee of your organization. So the training must serve their needs and not just yours. So if you're training them to have a really powerful, virtual meeting, train them, broadly on how to have any virtual meeting be good, be successful, rather than just having a Hill meeting be successful. Think of ways that you can broaden out your training so that people who are looking to carry these skills throughout the course of their career can do so by taking your advocacy training program. And then lastly, make it engaging. Whether it's gamification or hosting a video conference instead of a phone meeting, make sure your trainings are engaging. Otherwise, you're going to see people fall off. So what are we seeing in the field already? The Lupus Foundation of America did a great advocacy summit. They even created an actual image that you see in the bottom left of what it would look like to attend this advocacy summit. All it was just online streaming their sessions that they were normally going to have there. They did a lot of digital calls to action throughout their live streaming. They still had their sponsors who supported this meeting give various talks like they would have been there. So thinking about ways that you can bring your fly in and actually walk people through it is pretty interesting. Also on the right, just a ton of folks are doing moving less to just sending out emails and doing webinars, doing calls. This is a great way to get your public policy information out there. This is from the Council of Shopping Centers. You already have these people who are great advocates or extremely smart policy wonks in your own organization who can provide that to your members or to your employees. So lastly, keep the technology simple. Every organization has technology issues, and I think people are being a little bit generous now because everyone is trying to figure out all of this at the same time. So please just be cognizant of that and give folks a little bit of slack that it might take them a little while to figure this out. Create visual instructions. Like Andy said, film yourself downloading Zoom. You can do a screen share and show people, but really try to visualize or create video instructions. Folks are still not reading long emails. So the more that you can make it simple for them and actually show them, or actually call them up and say, hey, I'm going to walk you through how to download Zoom. You're going to be our best advocate for this center. I want to make sure this meeting goes well. Also, make sure this is an opportunity for your organization to innovate. Andy also repeated that, and hopefully shine. This is a time to show that you guys can adopt new technology very quickly. I would also suggest that you test, and then test some more. We are constantly testing at the council our technology platforms to see if they work, to see if we have if we're going to have an issue when we have a virtual presenter. So please be aware that testing helps a lot of these kinks. You're never going to find everything. There's always something that's going to come up, and it's usually right before you're about to go live. Make sure if you're live streaming, your Hill briefing, that you've tested it a couple times to make sure that you know what possibly could go wrong. Also be aware of technology limitations. A lot of people have mentioned this and overcapacity issues. And then also use resources what you have. So with that, I think we answered most of the questions. I'm just trying to go through to see if there was any other ones. I think that was almost all of them. Oh, one of the questions. Have you had any, Andy, this is, I think, for you, working with state legislators as opposed to members of Congress, have you done any of these meetings on state capitol level?
We have not, but I saw that question too, and it's a really good question because I think there's a difference in resources in state capitol. So for a member of Congress, you've got like 11 or 12 staffers per office. They're typically young, tech-savvy people, at least in their personal space. At state capitals, you have older legislators and you have older staff. So it's going to make it a little bit harder to try to break through with that. The flip side, though, is my mom and dad are, in their 70s, and they're pretty proficient on FaceTime when it comes to their grandkids. So there could be opportunities depending on what the channel is, but I think it'd be a little bit more difficult at the state level to do it, to be honest. I think that's a good point to raise.
Yeah, and I think you just need to be flexible. Like maybe you can have a FaceTime meeting if it's a one-to-one with an advocate.
Right.
That's definitely an option.
I would say too, typically your advocacy base at the local level probably know the state legislators by name. And you find people who do know those folks, and you do an all call and say, do you personally know your state legislator? And if you do, please, try to call them or something like that and personalize it that way and drive it home.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to thank Andy and Andrea for doing this. It was extremely last minute, and they are up to their eyes with work at their own associations. And so thank you so much for being able to take some time out of your day to put this together. We will be sending out the slides and recording to everyone as soon as we can. It just takes us a little time to send it out. So if folks had trouble seeing the slides for some reason, or they could only get on via the phone line, we'll be sending out slides to everyone, as well as a recording of this that they can, move forward and edit themselves. If you have any other final questions for us, please feel free to email us. Our contact information will be in our follow-up email. So just respond back to us. Hey, Andy, I loved the virtual reality thing. Well, can you tell me more? So just please use the council as a resource, and our community is definitely here to hopefully make your lives a little bit easier during these trying times. Please, everyone, stay home and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.